All right.
All right? Is it all right?
Yeah, I think so. Well, this is fun. So I just want to start by saying that yesterday was Biz's 40th birthday, and he flew in.
Thank you.
Last night. Instead of spending his 40th birthday with his family, he decided to spend it with you, nice people, today. So let's just, I don't think we want to sing, but can we hear?
But you can leave your presents at the door on the way out. It's fine.
Can we have a nice happy birthday, Biz, please, from the audience?
Thank you.
Happy birthday, Biz. Well done.
Let's also give a round of applause to Jessica, who helped set all of this up, and it looked impossible, but she did it, and all we had to do was walk up here, so she must have done something right.
Thanks, Jessica. So we've got, we're going to talk about a bunch of different things for about 45 minutes, and then we've got some time for questions. There's a hashtag, which for convenience sake we shortened to AskBiz, hashtag AskBiz, where you can tweet your questions in.
It really should have been Ask Biz and Stephen Berlin Johnson, but that seemed a little
excessive.
Yeah.
So but you can ask me a question too if you want. So yeah, we're gonna cover a lot of fun things here. So Biz, this is cool to be back at South by Southwest. This is where Twitter kind of first broke, right?
Yeah.
This is the kind of the origin of it in a way.
It's weird. It's really strange because, oh wait, I have a slide clicker.
Yeah.
Can someone bring me my slide clicker? I think I left it in the back room.
Oh, dear God. I mean, we should just say at the outset, we have known each other for a while. We've been kind of working on very similar themes over the years. In things that we've been doing. So it's fun to kind of get together.
Well, it's not just that we knew each other. Stephen was my favorite author. Like I read Emergence, and my mind was blown. It immediately made me realize that you could transpose all of these really cool. Thank you. All of these really cool things about nature onto other subjects, and I was just like, oh my God, this is incredible. This guy's a genius. And then I was at a dinner party, and my name is Stephen Johnson. I was like, the Stephen Johnson. So now we've been friends ever since, and he's invested in everything I've done. So and then as the years progressed, we learned that a lot of the science that he writes about and studies and investigates is, if it weren't for that, I couldn't build the things that I build. And so it's always fascinating to talk with Stephen because I'll tell him something about Twitter, like we learned by looking at these patterns of usage that people are trying to do this, so we built this feature, and he's like, that reminds me of in Amsterdam in 1108 when they were trying to build the canals. They, there's all these like
really boring
strange symbiotic things that are like fascinating. Anyway, so yes, we've known each other for a while, and. So, was there anything else you wanted to add to that?
No, let's talk about the early days of Twitter here.
Yeah, I do. Green means go. This is funny because I forget who took this, but this was some graffiti on a wall in 2007 here at South by Southwest. We'd been working on Twitter since 2006, and it was fun. We were having fun.
Was it still part of Obvious?
It was Obvious.
So it wasn't its own full company
It
yet.
wasn't Odeo. It was Obvious.
Right.
And it wasn't Twitter. And it was a project within Obvious. And we were working on it, and we were having so much fun with it. We were finding joy in our work. We loved it. But we came here, and this was the first time we saw Twitter in the wild. This was the first time we saw a high concentration of people using the service all at the same time in the same place. And one story that stands out is the story of a person who was at a pub, one of these pubs, and he wanted to talk about work and what people are working on, and he sent out a tweet that said, this place is too loud. We should go over to this other place, and he named it because it's quieter. And in the 8 minutes it took him to walk over there, the place was filled to capacity, line out the door, plan totally backfired, but my God, like when I heard the story, like it was spine tingling because after reading all your books about emergence and the whole is greater than the sum of the parts and all this stuff, I said, I think we have something new here. We've created something that allows humans to sort of coordinate in real time and move together en masse. And the image of a flight of birds moving around an object in flight, a flock of birds moving around an object in flight, like a telephone pole. A bunch of individuals all of a sudden become one organism, and then a bunch of individuals again. And yes, this happens in nature, but to my knowledge, it didn't happen with people. And we had created this technology, and that was allowing people to do that. So it was spine tingling in that, yeah, this was just a pub crawl, but what if it had been something important? And so we went right back and we started. We literally founded Twitter Incorporated, I think, the day after.
That's cool. I mean, and that was one of the things I think that people initially misunderstood about Twitter, that it was seen as the kind of ultimate short attention span kind of vanity publishing. Like, I'm going to tell the world what I had for breakfast. Mm-hmm. And so it seemed to kind of an outsider that it was just all about me, me, me. I'm just going to, the world is very interested in what I'm doing.
Right.
And it turned out to have this much more collective dynamic that was hard to, probably was hard for you guys to see until you saw it in practice in a space like South by Southwest.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I want to make a point about that. But before I get to that, though, I just wanted to say, like, so when we went back, we started a company, and then it was sort of company building time, and then it was time for me to, like, draw upon lessons, draw upon basically anything I could to try to form a company of enduring value, and we don't have enough time for me to go into all these lessons that I learned over the years, but one of them that I'll talk about deals with failure, and because some of my first startups were failures, and I learned something in middle school about failure that I didn't realize until Twitter was a valuable lesson. I was trying to do this gymnastics maneuver. Can
you act it out? Is it possible for us to see the gymnastics maneuver?
It is, but it's not. You don't want to. It's this maneuver where you sort of like you flip over backwards, you land on your hands, and then you continue backwards and you land on your feet, and it looks like this ninja move. It's so cool. And I was in middle school and I saw the other kids in gym class doing it, and I was like, oh, I'm going to do that. So I figured you just had to just jump really hard and use a lot of strength and flip backwards. And so I was doing that, and I was just in midair. I was just sort of turning and landing on my ribs over and over again, and it was painful. And the teacher saw me trying to do this, and he said, Biz, do you want to learn the trick to this maneuver? And I said, well, yeah, I'd like to stop falling on my ribs on the wooden floor. And he said, okay, here's the trick. It's really actually very easy. You use very little strength. What you do is you put your hands up like this to begin with, but all you do is you fall backwards past the point of recovery. So you are definitely going to fall in your spine. Definitely going to do that. But just before you do, your hands are by that time close to the ground. You just give a little push with your toes. Your fingers will hit the floor, and the momentum will carry you backwards onto your feet. And so I did it. But it's this incredibly difficult mental maneuver to allow yourself to fall on your spine. And so that translated years later to the lesson, in order to succeed spectacularly, you must be willing to fail spectacularly. And so that was a sort of a driving lesson in building Twitter, the company, was if you want to build a company of enduring value, you got to be willing to go all the way.
Yep.
And so we started, so we came back, we built Twitter, working on it, we were heads down, heads down, heads down. And then, the lesson learned from South by Southwest was amazing. But then we saw everything happening. I mean, just stuff was happening all around the world. And Twitter is being mentioned in concert with it, whether it deserved it or not. The point is, people were doing things. People were doing amazingly brave things. And they happen to be using Twitter sometimes to do these things. And
that's a collective action point that you have somewhat self-organizing protest movements all around the world. I mean, I love the fact that Occupy Wall Street was a hashtag for months before it was a movement, right? It started with the hashtag Occupy Wall Street, and it took like 2 months before people were like, hey, what if we actually occupied Wall Street? Like that's such a good hashtag, we should go do it, you know? And the idea that you guys were, in a sense, creating this incredible platform for political protest, whether you think that it was central or just an important, you know, kind of role in these protest movements, it's clear that Occupy started with the hashtag. There's no denying that. And again, that was not at all part of the vision initially.
No, the initial vision was, hey, look, you can see what your friends are up to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was good enough for us. And then it just started growing and growing and growing, and all of these things started happening, and they were essentially unintended consequences of something that a simple tool we had built had started. Hundreds of unintended consequences started to come out of that.
Biz is too modest to bring it up, but like the gymnastics story and things like this are in this new book.
Right. I forgot to say, I have a new book coming out April 1st, and there's a whole bunch of aphorisms that I've learned over time that I think are very helpful. And if the aphorism itself isn't helpful, at least the story leading up to it, where I hurt myself, will be funny.
Yeah.
So
how much is
you're
about
covered.
Your middle school gymnastics? Is that a whole section?
No, that's
just
a little
bit. Okay, good. The other thing I love about the unintended consequences of Twitter is that you have these kind of global developments and kind of mass protest movements and things like that. But then you also have these really interesting, almost kind of psychological effects of new technology. So I have noticed this thing. I wonder if other people have had this experience. I've never talked about this in public, but probably shouldn't. But I find myself all the time walking down the street, and some little idea occurs to me, some little observation about the world or witticism about something or whatever. And I find myself, without thinking about it consciously at all, walking through it in my head, thinking whether it will fit into 140 characters. You know, it's like a little crossword puzzle you're doing in your head. Like, no, if I cut that clause, then I could probably fit. I think I know roughly what 140 characters are now.
Will you marry me? That'll work.
Fit. You know, that'll work. And the fact that here you kind of devise you create this communications platform, and then, you know, whatever, 8 years later, there are people walking down the streets who are reorganizing the structure of their thoughts intuitively in their head to fit this format that you guys embraced of 140 characters. I mean, it's an amazing thing.
It is. It's you know, I mean, it's yet another, I guess, manifestation of this these unintended consequences, which come to us like all the time. And it's not unique. It's not like it's unique to Twitter in any way. I'm sure anyone who's ever worked on any kind of technology startup or project or something has said, "Oh wow, well we didn't think that would happen if that occurred." I happen to know that there's a TV show coming out that has something to do with the results of unintended consequences.
Oh, that's so weird. I have clips from that show.
Oh, really?
That's so funny.
What a coincidence.
Yeah, so we're doing this show about basically the history of innovation, history of all these technologies. 6 episodes, me on PBS in the fall, BBC Two in the UK. And
who plays you?
Weirdly, I've cast myself as the host. And each episode is about one facet of modern life that we kind of take for granted, like clean drinking water, or artificial light, or artificial cold, or clocks. And it tells the kind of 500-year history of how that technology came into being and all the stories and interesting, weird, crazy people who came up with these ideas. But it also, one of the big themes is all the unintended consequences. So you try and invent one thing and it triggers all these reactions that you never expected. And on a show, I've not showed any clips from this. This is the first time we've shown it in public. So I want to show you two things.
Way, your reaction will determine whether or not it airs. Please enjoy.
So the first thing I want to show is from an episode we did on clocks and time, which is really just amazing history about what happens as clocks get increasingly accurate. And one of the things we tried to do in the show is talk about problems that were solved in the past that are so remote to us now that we don't even think about them as problems. That we just kind of internalize the solutions so we don't even think that someone had to actually fix this thing. And one of them is it involves standardizing time, coordinating clocks around the world, which is an incredibly hard thing to do. And for a long time, we didn't even realize it was a problem until other technologies came along. So we can roll this clip, and I'll explain a little bit more about it.
Which one here? I want to see it.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Here's the issue. The railroads are connecting all of these towns that have historically maintained their own individual time set by a local reading of the sun. In the 1880s, there were over 8,000 towns using their own local time, each differing not by the hour, but by the minute. What makes it even worse is that in addition to each town having its own time, each railroad had its own time, and there were 50 different railroads. So back then, taking a journey by rail was something of an adventure, which could leave you more than a little confused. Imagine what it would have been like in 1870 trying to take a train. Let's say we're traveling from New Haven to New York. And so I get on the train at 12 o'clock New Haven time. And it takes us 2 hours to get to New York. So we should be arriving in New York at 2 o'clock. But in fact, in New York time, that's technically 1:55. But the train we're on is actually running on Boston time. So that means we're actually pulling into the station in New York on Boston time at 2:17, but then we're like making a connection to a train to Baltimore that's running on Baltimore time, so that train is actually leaving the station at 2:07, which seems to be in the past. I mean, you have to be a math major to figure out what time it is.
That's crazy.
So it's very hard to make interesting television about standardized time. Time zone's not exactly the thing that you would jump out. It's not True Detective. But what I love about that story is this is something that no one even noticed, right? No one cared that the town one stop over was 4 minutes ahead or behind because there was no need to kind of coordinate. But it all changed once the railroads appeared. So suddenly people were moving very quickly, and information, thanks to the telegraph, was moving very quickly. And so suddenly this flaw in everybody's clocks became visible thanks to railroads, which you wouldn't think was related to clocks directly. And once we solved that problem, and it took this kind of crazy railroad clerk who was managing all the timetables to kind of evangelize for it, and all these towns resisted it. They're all like, it's unnatural. Like, we should be setting our town's time based on a direct reading of the sun with a sundial, not, you know, what time it is in Baltimore or New York or something like that. So there was a huge, I mean, it was a big controversy. But once they consolidated, it created, once they had 4 time zones in the US, it created a time platform that then became crucial to 20th century media. Right? Suddenly, once you had standardized time, you could say, everybody tune in at 8 p.m. for this radio broadcast or at 9 o'clock for this TV show. So that's the kind of the weird lateral way that technology tends to advance is you make a breakthrough in transportation in the railroads, which exposes a flaw in everybody's clock. So you fix that, which then creates a platform that enables people to listen to jazz concerts on time in a coordinated way all across the country.
Or coordinate broadcast television, which then changes the entire geopolitical system.
Exactly, exactly. So
all because of that one crazy clerk.
Yeah. He's a guy named William Allen, and he just literally would send all these letters out to all these people who were running clocks and stations and railroads, and you know, just this mass campaign. But the other thing that I think is important about this stuff, which is directly related to everything that you've done, is this isn't a pure kind of techno-deterministic argument. Right? So you definitely have situations where a technology emerges, a new platform emerges, and because of the kind of intrinsic properties of that technology, certain ideas or certain social changes become possible or become imaginable for the first time, right? And it's important to look at history that way. It's important to look at our own lives and our own society that way. What becomes imaginable once you have something like Twitter? But at that point, the choices of what we do with that technology, the ways in which we push it, the uses we kind of invent for that technology, that is not always dictated by the technology. It's kind of constrained by it and channeled in certain directions, but we have a lot of autonomy as individuals and as a society to kind of invent uses that are valuable or important or better our lives or, or serve some broader kind of social good. And so we try and talk about in this show that theme in the show as well. And so I'll show you one other clip, which is from the episode on light. And in this clip, it's talking about the invention of flash photography. Basically, for 50 years after the photograph was invented, originally the daguerreotype, for 50 years, there was no reliable method of doing indoor photography. In fact, if you see all the photographs that were taken for this first 50 years, the exposures are so bad that people have to be incredibly still. They have to sit for like 20 seconds. And so photography was really not any different from portrait art, because the person had to be really, really stiff so they could have those long exposures to get enough light in. And you couldn't photograph anything indoors. But what happens is a couple of kind of German inventors come up with this basically small controlled explosion, which was something they called Blitzlicht, flashlight. And news of this crosses the Atlantic, where it attracts the attention of Jacob Riis, the great pioneering progressive muckraker, who at that point was in New York City trying to create some sense of national outrage about the conditions that people were living in the slums of Five Points and downtown New York, and this incredible poverty and unbelievable conditions of the tenement houses there. And he'd been writing articles, he'd been had drawings associated with these articles, and nothing was working. And he wanted to photograph it. He thought if people could see the conditions here, if they could actually see and experience what people were living like, that would transform people's attitude towards the city. And he hears about Blitzlicht, he hears about this new flashlight, and he thinks, finally, I'll be able to take a picture in these dark tenement houses. And so he's one of the first people to adopt it, and this is what we did was we found a guy who was an expert at kind of old photography equipment who actually mixed this Blitzlicht powder for me, which was really unnerving, and we actually set off a bunch of these things to give some sense of it, and here's another clip of that.
Riis wants to photograph the people in the tenements unposed and spontaneous, so he sets off unannounced into the slums after midnight. And you can imagine how surprising it must have been for these people when a stranger walks into their home and sets off a small explosion.
More than a few occupants are left dazed and confused. Riis said, "Our party carried terror wherever it went." But at least he gets his photographs. Using a magic lantern, Riis shows his pictures to a wide audience.
People encounter Riis's images and sets in motion a dramatic change in public opinion, triggering one of the great movements of social reform in American history.
Thanks to Riis, many of the city's worst tenement buildings are torn down. A decade of improvements follows, with sewers, rubbish collection, and indoor plumbing.
Riis used his images to share his vision and change the way we see the world. One century comes up with a way to capture images in a dimly lit room, and by the next century, it has transformed the lives of city dwellers everywhere.
So we did, funny
Were
thing
you
about-
insured? Are you insured?
I know. It was really intense. There was this big explosion happening, and the guy he was setting it up, and he was pouring. It's basically gunpowder mixed with something else, and so he's setting up, and if you notice in the shot, I'm wearing this little apron, and he's like, "Let me put this on you," and I was like, "Oh, nothing bad can happen. I'm wearing an apron. This will be fine.
Right.
I definitely won't catch on fire with it because of this apron here." And we did actually, one of the things I like about it, we do this a lot in the show. We kind of stage these weird public events. So we
I saw that projected. People were taking pictures of it.
Yeah, we're just like in the East Village, right around where Reese lived and worked, and where he, revolutionized the way that cities work with his muckraking. And we projected those images up there and just kind of watched people go by. And it was really lovely and really moving. But it's a great story, and again, it's this idea that he needed the technology, and on some level, the technology was going to happen. No matter whether it was these German scientists who invented, somebody was going to invent flash photography around that time. That's the way innovation works. You hit a certain kind of critical threshold, and a certain set of tools become imaginable and inventable. But what was not inevitable was that shortly after that technology of flashlight, flash photography was invented, that someone would use that tool to change the living conditions of people in urban poverty around the U.S. That was something that took a unique individual to kind of make that choice. And I think that's the balance that we have to strike when we're trying to think about both our own lives and what we do with our own lives and our own society and the historical past. Is the technology is driving things. It is a big part of that story. But there is also kind of human agency that's part of that as well.
Well, that's the thing that I always think about. Is that, the thing that I like to say is that, the way I like to describe myself is as an internet guy, an internet guy who believes in the triumph of humanity with a little help from technology. Yeah. And the idea that I have a simple ordered list in my head, which is number one, people, number two, technology. And I've worked at Google, and a lot of times people are just coming up with technology, and certainly it's a driver. But like that, your example is a perfect example of my basic fundamental belief that people are good, and if you build the right tools to help them do good things, they'll prove it to you on a daily basis. And that's also something I write about extensively in the book, is like all of these examples of if you build it, they will do good things. And it happened over and over and over again. At Blogger we saw people are basically good. At Twitter we saw people are basically good. It's not just like this hallucinogenic optimism. It has to be true, because if we couldn't build these large scale collaborative networks, they wouldn't work if most of the people weren't good. Yeah. Same is true for cities. We wouldn't be sitting in a building. We wouldn't have all of this stuff if people weren't wired to communicate. If people weren't, if it wasn't in our DNA to cooperate and help each other.
It's interesting to think about the architecture of systems that can or cannot be hijacked by a smaller minority of evildoers.
Right. There's always them. Right.
And then some, spam and email. The architecture of email made it vulnerable to spam. And so, most people are just trying to use email to just, send a nice message, invite somebody to a birthday party, whatever it is they're doing. And it works great for that. But something about the open and incredibly cheap architecture of email made it possible for a very small number of spammers to take up a huge amount of the bandwidth of email sent around the world. It's a massive amount of it. Whereas social network architectures like Twitter, just have a built-in limitation for that because they are defined by social networks first, and they aren't this. Well,
it's a little that Twitter in general is flipped around because it's recipient driven. Like if I know your email, then I can email you, and you're like, great, Busy emailed me. But Twitter is the other way around. Right. Like I want you to send me something, so when you write something, I hope it goes to me. Yeah. So that's a little bit different, but yeah, that's been the basic thrust of of my work, and I left Twitter a few years ago, and I just started getting kind of philosophical about all of this stuff, about, you know, okay, so for the past decade we've been collecting followers, and we've been collecting friends, and we've been collecting colleagues, and we've, you know, nobody has this long-term goal in mind for when they tap the follow button. You know, you just want your friends' cute Instagram baby pictures, right? And it's like, it's not like I'm gonna bust anyone's chops for not thinking it through. But I have to think that, like, you know, inspired by a lot of your books, I have to think that humanity is sort of moving towards its most connected it's ever been in the history of mankind for some good reason. And so it started to occur to me, like, why? And why are we becoming so hyper-connected? Like, what is the true promise of a connected society?
Right.
You know, there's someone waiting to play letterpress with you right now.
Is that all there is?
That's great. But would I call that the true promise of a connected society? And you know, the more I thought about it, the more I thought that the true promise of a connected society has to be people helping each other, which gets back to just all of this stuff we're talking about.
Yeah.
Well, this is probably a good time to talk about jelly now too, right?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like jelly seemed to me to have kind of emerged out of things that were.
Oh, sorry,
that
was you.
Oh yeah. Thank you for skipping that photo of me. You know, I found myself, before you even told me about jelly, I found myself straining to use Twitter in the way that jelly ultimately now is being used to basically get help from people. You know, so I would constantly be somewhere and be like, what should I do? Hey,
right.
You know, it was kind of this open conversation where you could throw out a question and you could get answers just in real time wherever you were. And what you've done is kind of taken jelly and really focused a company and a service on that on that problem.
Well, and for someone like you, actually asking Twitter probably works really well because you have so many fans and followers and so forth. Let me just go through a few. I prepared a few
explain
things
for people who haven't seen it, like how it actually
what I'll
works.
do is I'll do show and tell. So jelly, the idea of jelly is basically it just came about by mistake. My friend Ben Finkel and I were walking around, and I asked him, "What if we had to build a search engine?" And he, you know, I wouldn't be able to build a search engine. Would you? You know, Ben happens to be a technical genius, but I said, but what if you and I had to build a search engine today, not in 1999, and not necessarily to search the collection of documents we call the internet, but a system that could answer any question you put to it, you know, like an oracle of our day. And those right now are search engines. We started thinking about it, and we thought, like, well, the internet's awesome. I mean, there's tons of stuff on there, but the internet's not everything.
Yeah.
And then, you know, I started asking myself, well, there's 7 billion people on the planet, and there's that many mobile devices, and recent white papers have come out that have said that the new 6 degrees of separation is 4 because of social networks and mobile devices. And I said, Ben, aren't these mobile devices we carry around like the hyperlinks between people? I mean, wouldn't it be true that if I had a question, there's got to be someone within a few degrees of separation somewhere on the planet that could help me? And we just couldn't get this idea out of our heads. And so we built it. And so the way Jelly works is right now, I mean, it's a month old, a little bit over a month old, but we're seeing sort of 3 types of questions being asked on Jelly. We're seeing recommendation type of questions, and we haven't built maps into it yet. So this guy took a picture of himself on, what is it, the 23rd and 7th, and it's clearly New York City, and he asked, I want some Indian food, like, where should I go? Somebody 10 minutes later said, just walk east to Curry Hill. It's like you know, I guess it's his favorite restaurant or something. And we just thought that was so cool that he could just, you know, you know, he could get an answer from someone in his social network, someone he ostensibly trusts. You know, it's either a friend or a friend of a friend. So okay, walk east, get some Indian. So that's recommendations. Then we're seeing a lot of troubleshooting stuff, like, oh my God, this is the back of my TV. How do I hook up this thing? And people will draw on it or whatever. I like this one because someone asked, how do you take a screenshot on a Mac? And the answer wasn't even used with words. It was just touch these 3 buttons. You know, it's just like great.
The ability to draw on the image is surprisingly powerful.
Well, that's because
it's amazing. You're so used to just having an image, but the idea of like this thing, what is that thing?
I know.
There?
I mean, we almost didn't ship with it, but I told my team, I said, like, this is like, you guys are forgetting how cool it is that we have these iPhones and stuff. We can draw on it with them on our finger. That's so fun. Yeah. And yeah, he just said, like, touch these 3 buttons. I mean, it's incredible. So that's like a lot of troubleshooting stuff, and then obviously because there's cameras built into all of these things, identification is a huge use case. So someone sees this on a beach in Florida, and they say, like, what the hell is this thing? and then someone answers, it's the egg case for a channeled whelk. Okay, great. Now he knows what it is. By the way, this is a channeled whelk, because I didn't know what it was. I had to look it up.
It's great. You got gymnastics and marine biology.
Yeah.
You're saying so many useful tidbits for us.
And by the way, this is a Katie. So this is a person named Katie. And this gets to like a little bit to the point of how what you were talking about using Twitter. Like, most people don't have gigantic, vast networks. They don't have 2 million followers on Twitter and things like this. They're just regular people, and they have friends on. They have some stuff they follow on Twitter. They have some friends on Facebook, whatever. They have modest networks. So this is just like a very mundane example of Jelly in action. Katie is going to move in a month into a new place, and she wanted to know if anyone could recommend a guy to hang a TV and some artwork and stuff. Does anyone know a good handyman and Sxsw to do this? And she got 5 answers, which is like fine, 5 answers. And so this is what she saw on Jelly. But this is what happened. This is what's going on Jelly on our side. Because we're taking both Twitter and Facebook and we're merging them into one agnostic network, and later, of course, we'll add all the other networks. We're just turning them into one big network. And then within that network, a question, people can see her question. They can pass on it if they can't help. But they can also, if they think they know someone in their contacts, they can forward it to someone in their contacts. And that's the strength of weak ties. That's now jumping straight out of her first or second degree friends and into like somebody she'll never know, and that could help her, like my friend's contractor, Right. Or and then we also have a button you can tap on a question if you can't help, but you wanna help, you can tap good, and that'll show it to more people. So in a way, what we can do is we can give someone who has a very modest social network on 1 or 2 or 3 of these services, we can give them much wider reach. And so I just thought it was interesting to show what it looked like on our end when she only saw 5 little answer cards. This is what we see. And then we zoom in and we see that this person viewed it and then answered it. And she said, oh, you should call my guy Tyler Hudson. This is a good TV hanger guy. And then Katie texted the guy, and he said, hey, Morgan said that you could come hang my TV and yada, yada, yada. And he says, well, I can't do it. I'm out this week. And she says, no. And in fact, he says, I can't do it right now, but you should call this guy. So now she gets another recommendation that's not even on Jelly of another guy who could help. And she says, no, it's next month. And he says, oh, good, I'll do it next month. So you'll be happy to know she's going to have her TV hung next month in her apartment.
And let me ask you a couple of questions about this. So when you first told me about it, the forwarding part of the process was really interesting to me, because that's the that's the potential kind of jump of filtering where it's like you asked a specific question about marine biology.
Yeah.
And no one in your network is a marine biologist, but the likelihood that someone in that network, even if it's a small network, knows someone who is a marine biologist is quite high. And so you've got this extra little layer of human filtering.
Yeah.
Where it comes in just randomly into someone's inbox and in Jelly, and they look at it and say, aha, I know the connection for this.
Yeah, that is not being used as much as I want it to be used. So we need to, there's a ton of things we're going to add and fix and everything else. But when we came up with the concept of Jelly in our heads, I did what I often did with Twitter, which was I just made up use cases. Yeah. A lot of my made up use cases for Twitter eventually came true. Here, we'll get it off Katie's text, and we'll put it on this while we talk. Really? So, like a made up use case I had for Jelly way before we even built anything, when it was just prototypes, was okay. Hey guys, listen. Let's say there's a guy walking on Muir Beach in California, and he comes across what looks like a wounded seal, and what does he know from seals? But people are basically good, and they want to help. And so he says, okay, what do I do? So he has Jelly. He takes a picture. He sends it out. It goes to another Jelly user, let's say Bijan Sabet in Boston. He served on the board of directors of Twitter. He looks at it, and he says, oh, I don't have Biz's wife's information, but I know she does something with animal rescue, so I'll just forward this to Biz. So he forwards it to me. Now I'm getting a text message from a friend that says, hey, Biz, can you help with this? I don't have to have Jelly because it goes to the mobile web. But I look at it, and I immediately say, oh, this is for Livy. She's volunteered at the Marine Mammal Center for 15 years. So I send it to her, and now she's getting a text message from her husband, and she looks at it, and she says, oh, I know exactly what to do. So she calls the Marine Mammal Center, and then she just answers the question, and she says, we'll just stay there for 10 minutes. The Marine Mammal Center rescue van is on its way, and by the way, don't let your dog get near the seal because their diseases are communicable. And so he taps the thanks button, and everyone in the chain gets a warmly worded thank you note. We all feel like wonderful people. Yeah. And that's sort of how I described how it might work once we built it.
Okay, I have two more questions, and then just remind people, tweet your questions to #AskBiz, and we'll go to those in just 3 or 4 minutes. Two questions. First, I'm curious about your imagined use cases for Twitter. Did any of them not come true that you can remember? Is there anything that was in the vision that kind of did it end up getting used that way?
You tend to remember the things that worked.
Because there are all these stories of, this famous stuff about how Graham Bell, when he was inventing the telephone, he thought a primary use case was going to be people playing music. So it'd be like someone playing a cello on one end and somebody on the other end being like, oh, this is beautiful.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much for playing a cello for me. And Edison thought the phonograph was going to be used for dictating letters, basically dictating a phone conversation. And
so you could send it.
You record this thing, you put it in the mail, and it'd be like, "Hello, John. How are you doing? And so nice to talk to you." And they both got it wrong. In fact, it turned out to be if you wanted to have a conversation, you used Graham Bell's thing, and if you want to listen to music, you listen to Edison's thing. So there is that there's a kind of blindness that you have at the beginning, and that's the beautiful thing about powerful innovations is that they unlock all these doors that you didn't anticipate.
Yeah. But I just remember dreaming up use cases for Twitter that were aspirational because we were just working amidst a flurry of negative comments.
Right.
And so I was always telling my team, don't listen to that because Twitter works on the simplest of feature phones in any country in the world, and yeah, some people can say that they used it for saying what they had for breakfast or some stupid thing like that, but some farmer in Africa could use Twitter to find out is there what is grain trading at the market because I'm gonna have to schlep 50 miles and I'd like to know in advance, and maybe it's trading at twice what he was going to charge, and that changes his life for a year, right? And that ended up coming true in India. I'm sure I came up with stuff that was complete an utter lunacy that never worked out. But my use cases tend to be of the aspirational nature because I have this, you know, hallucinogenic optimism, you know, and like I was telling you earlier, I think everyone has the same experience when they are driving down the highway. They see someone broken down on the side of the road. The first thing everyone thinks is, I should stop and help. The second immediate thing, they might be crazy. I could get stuck here for hours.
Yeah.
Followed immediately by, well, I'm on my way home. I'm going to be late. Followed immediately by, well, they probably have AAA. Who doesn't have AAA? Oh, and they have a cell phone. They called a friend by now, obviously. In fact, they probably called a friend, have AAA. If I stop, I'm a nuisance.
You'll just freak them out.
Yeah, they'll just be a weird guy stopping. better to keep going.
Right.
But if we do stop, and they're like, oh, thank God. Oh, change a tire. Da, da, da. We feel so good about ourselves. And we go, for the next 2 weeks, we're at work. And we're like, oh, you guys drove to work today? That reminds me of how I stopped last night. And so, I don't know about what you guys do, but I stop and save people. And we thought, like, with Jelly, we thought, if we could reduce that down to tapping on glass.
Right.
With no less of the thank you, you know, the feeling of gratitude, and certainly in the case of like the seal, if I hadn't connected Bijan's note to Livy and Livy to the van that picked it up, I mean, I didn't drive and pick up the seal, but without me, it wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
So
you do remember
I basically did drive and rescue the seal, even though that's made up.
Yeah, I was just going to say,
never
it's
happened.
a fictitious story, but that's
I
okay.
save seals.
You've told it so many times that you now
I'm
believe it
Aquaman.
Okay, last question, and then we'll turn to these questions. So what's the process to get people to answer questions? I get completely why Jelly works when you have the question.
It's so funny that people ask this because
yeah.
The biggest constraint on Jelly is questions. We have overwhelming amounts of answers.
That's really interesting.
And it's because people like helping other people. They want to help. They we're wired to help. For every question gets deluged with answers. We had dinner last night, and Stephen Wolfram joined us, of all people, and he said the same thing to me. He said, "Why would anyone answer a question?" Well, first of all, he said, "What do you? I don't even know who you are. Why did you invite me to dinner?" And I said, "I thought you were a different Stephen, but join us." And then I said, "My new thing." And he said, "What's your new thing?" And I said, "Well, we're kind of building a search engine." And he was like, "Okay, tell me more." He said, and I said, "Well, it's not really computery. It's kind of people-y." And he said, "Well, show me how it works." And he put a piece of bread on the table, and he said, "How many calories are in that slice of bread?" And I took a picture of it, and I asked. And in less than 2 minutes, I had an answer. And somebody said 100 calories. And he got out his computer and his thing and all his dorky technology, and he was doing all this stuff and everything.
He's not going to come to dinner next time you ask him after.
He's a great guy. And then while he was doing that, I got like 7 other answers, and they were like 75, 80. They were all in the range of 100. And finally, he got his software open, and he did all his stuff and histograms and all these things, and he was like, "Well, I'll tell you, it's 97 calories." Anyway, it was.
But that's it. I mean, it is weirdly. I've noticed as a user that it is weirdly hypnotic, just going through random questions. Not even questions that have been directed to me, where there's some sense that I have some expertise, but they're just seeing the questions and being like, "Oh, that's interesting. That's cool."
Well, that's why that's just like Twitter. We started adding features because people wanted, like, people were stumbling across questions that they were like, "Ooh, I want to know the answer to that question."
Yeah.
And we didn't know that was going to happen, so that we put a little star. Like, if you star a question, you can get the answer to that too. Like I didn't have it before, but now that I see it, I definitely want to know.
Yep.
So I'm sure there's going to be tons more things like that down the line where we're going to, just watch for patterns and try to. The main goal is to just try to help people. So whatever we can do to do that is what we're going to do.
All right, let's go to the questions. First question comes from Robert Moore. If most major advances are the result of unintended consequences, what role does the entrepreneur play?
Should I answer that or should you? It says Ask Biz, but we did decide that was for both of us.
Yeah.
I mean, I could answer it.
Go, start.
Well, this makes me think. This makes me want to transpose this to like teacher student. I think that there's this great educational thinker named Professor Mitra. Have you heard of this guy? He's the guy who built the Alta Vista into the slums in India, and
sure.
He's the guy. His whole thing is that children can basically teach themselves. They just need a guide. And so the role of the entrepreneur is to just get the talented people together into a room to build tools that will help people do good things in the world. And so it's not the role of the entrepreneur is to just assemble the group.
Yeah. And I think the other thing is you get a new platform, you get a new set of, in a sense, technological possibilities because of the web, say, or because of the invention of the telephone network. And what entrepreneurs do is explore the new space that has been created by that new platform. And so people start using a new technology because they're told it's supposed to be used this way.
Right.
And entrepreneurs kind of probe at the new boundaries.
What else could we use it for?
Yeah, what could we do if we took this and did this over here? And that's why failure, and the gymnastics metaphor is so important, because you end up going down a lot of dead ends, and that's why it's important to have, that's the kind of social function of startups and venture capital, is that there has to be a lot of mistakes in probing those boundaries, because it's very hard to see what you can do and predict in advance what you can do.
Exactly.
But if you have a lot of experimentation, you end up with a great idea like Twitter and like Jelly becoming possible.
Yeah, I mean, even like SMS itself was Band 7 or whatever it was called, was only invented so that it could light up the light to tell you got a message. And then somebody figured out, oh, we could put a little bit of data in here, about 160 characters worth of text.
Love it.
And then they said, oh, and we could charge 25 cents for it, even though it doesn't cost us anything. And then we thought, oh, why don't we build something else? Anyway, so.
I love that. Somebody invents a technology to light up a light on a cell phone, and 15 years later, I'm walking around refashioning sentences into 140 characters because of that standard. I mean, that's a great example of that. Okay, this is for you. What was the role of each founder? This is going to be good. I'm excited to hear the answer to this. The role of each founder when you started Twitter.
Okay, so Ev had money. I had design skills and product skills and experience building social networks. And Jack had programming skills and a unique vision for wanting to see a city in the form of its multiple status reports. Is that a good answer?
Right.
That's a short answer.
I mean, the thing I like about Twitter is there's such a desire in the press to have the heroic single founder story. That just there's a slot for that people want to hear the story that way. And we all know from being inside of startups that it just is never like that. The idea is never the single idea in one guy's mind or one gal's mind. It's this network of collaboration. And it may be driven by one person. One person maybe the
It's just
CEO.
like, I mean, it's the people version of what we've just been talking about. If not for this, then this guy couldn't do this, and then this guy couldn't do that.
And Twitter was always this great corrective to that. It was really, it was really about the kind of unique combined talents of a bunch of different people. All right, Biz, you have to answer this one. If you could punch any tech entrepreneur, who would you punch and why?
Well, I've never punched anyone in my life. And I don't think I would start now because I probably would hurt myself.
Gently slap?
Gently slap? That's a bad question for me because I'm such a
We're gonna pass on that
non-violent person.
How do you intend to monetize Jelly? Do you intend to monetize?
Of course. I have my own new definition of success that I'm advocating. That's also in the book. which is that the future definition of success in capitalism has 3 ingredients. 1, traditional success, financial success, build a business of enduring value. 2, have some sort of meaningful impact in the world, some sort of, tie your, do good by doing well. And 3, have joy in your work, enjoy your work, have emotional investment in your work. And if you don't meet all 3 criteria, in my definition, you're not technically successful. So to be successful with Jelly, we're going to have to build a business of enduring value. That being said, all I can say right now about Jelly, because we're just getting started, and this sounds silly to a lot of people who run non-tech businesses, but it's actually cart before the horse to start working on a business model when you have 8 people, because you first need to build a product that you can prove is of value before you decide to monetize. So we first need to do that. But we still have ideas. We consider Jelly to be in the search space. There is an expressed intent when you're asking a question on Jelly. I want X. And when you have something like that, you have an incredible opportunity to invite a third party to make an introduction. Google has made a lot of money introducing people to something they're looking for on the internet. I would like socks. Will Hanes happens to have socks. Would you like Hanes socks? Well, why, yes, I would. So there's a lot of opportunity there. The only thing is I want to make sure that we do it such that people can only give us money if they're also helping, really doing a good job helping the people on Jelly. So if you can help people on Jelly really well, then you can give us money.
Yeah. It reminds me of something you told me years ago about how there's like 3 extra characters in the SMS. There's 160 characters.
Oh, yeah. No, there's 5.
There's 5, and you kept trying to dream up a 5-character advertising scheme.
It was kind of a joke. A lot of my stuff was a joke. A lot of the stuff about Twitter was just jokes that we actually really did. Anyway,
good
but lesson. We 160 characters are allowed in text messages. Originally, it was 160 minus your username, plus a space and a colon, and I just thought that was unfair. So we standardized on 140, but we only allow 15-character long usernames. So there's 5 extra characters. So I said, why don't we could sell 5-character ads.
Okay.
Coke!
We got
exclamation point.
This is a very complicated question. We have 1 minute and 36 seconds left. What could Washington policymakers do to better support startups and entrepreneurship?
You should answer that one. Oh, it says for me, but you haven't answered anything.
Well, look, I mean, I think one big thing is patent reform, right? I mean, it's just crazy how, we have
for sure
all these startups coming up with these ideas who are dealing with, kind of people trolling them, getting cease and desist letters from lawyers when they're trying to kind of push the envelope of possibility with these new technologies. That would be a great place.
That's why Jelly has adopted Twitter's innovators patent.
Oh, just say one thing about that, because that's really important.
Well, it's just kind of a pledge that we're never gonna go to war over. So if you work for Jelly and you invent something, it's your invention. The IP belongs to you, and Jelly has a license to use it, but we're never gonna sue another company. For using your invention. It's your invention.
That was a really monumental idea that came out of Twitter that I don't think people recognize enough. That alone could make a big difference if more people adopted that. All right, everyone. Thank you all for coming out.
Thanks,
Biz, for being on your 40th birthday. Super fun.